and welcome to a brand new episode of Windows. My name is Ahmed Nader, and tonight we will be focusing on tourism and the number of tourists that are expected to be pouring into the country during this year and next as well, after the inauguration of the Grand Egyptian Museum, or rather the full inauguration, the official inauguration of the Grand Egyptian Museum here in Cairo, overseeing the Pyramids Plateau. And I'm honored to be having with me over the episode of Windows for tonight to be focusing on such an important topic is Dr. Mahmoud Halwagy, the archaeological expert, the museologist, and the former director of the Egyptian Museum and the Provincial Museums of Egypt. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on Nile TV International and Windows.
Thank you.
Anytime. First of all, how do you see the renovation of the archaeological sites and the touristic sites here in Egypt over the past few years?
In fact, the renovation of most of archaeological sites,
yes,
and touristic sites, and is showing that Egypt is interested in preserving its heritage. And this is a message that tells the world that Egypt is taking care of its heritage, archaeological sites, as well as its artifacts, and also because this is when we were asking to retrieve some stolen objects, there was a kind of message says that Egypt are not taking care of its archaeological sites or artifacts.
Yes.
But this is to clarify to the whole world that Egypt is well and interested in preserving heritage and keeping its artifacts, as well as inaugurating many new modern sites and recent excavations, and also opening new modern museums.
Speaking of our heritage, because we have seen over the social media over the past few weeks maybe some other proposed cultures saying that our heritage is theirs. How would you respond to those allegations, if we can call them that?
I think that there is no doubt that Egypt is a cradle of civilization.
Yes.
This is proved through its history and heritage, and most of archaeological sites, it shows ancient Egyptians, figures, decoration, its features, costumes.
And even with colors sometimes, the color of the
with
skin.
everything. You can see this clearly everywhere in most of tombs, temples, everywhere all over Egypt. And this is proof that Egypt is the real mother of the world and the real cradle of civilization and religion as well, because most of the religious stories,
Yes.
most of them took place on Egypt through ages.
Yes.
So I can say that it's just because not only the recent achievement, or I mean the recent the centric Africa.
Yes, the campaigns on
Yes.
social media. Yes.
Not only, but there were many other places trying to say that we are the builder of the ancient Egyptian civilization. Even they were not even born when Egypt started to build its civilization. like some other places, they says that pyramids, we have built the pyramids.
Yes.
And even they were unknown long time before, after the building of pyramids of Egypt.
Maybe for thousands of years.
Yes.
So this is the biggest response, that we can tell the entire world to be coming and seeing for themselves through the tombs, through the archaeological sites, through the museums as well. One of the museums is the Grand Egyptian Museum, the GEM. It has a soft opening, a soft inauguration. How do you see the response so far for the people who have been to the soft opening of the GEM?
I would like to say that this is giving and sending message to the whole world. The messages are that Egypt is open arms to welcome the whole world.
Yes.
And second is Egypt is taking care of and renovating the archaeological sites, opening new museums. So we are taking care our heritage, as well as we are passing through a modern era, modern Egypt. Also, the message, the very most important message, that it shows determination of Egypt and Egyptians.
Yes.
To continue such huge national project, the Grand Egyptian Museum.
Yes.
Because it was started in 2005, the cornerstone was built, and then we passed by critical times starting from 2011, which delayed the project too much. So instead of, it was planned that the museum will open in 2018.
Yes.
But after 2011, the project was a little bit delayed for many reasons, economically and politically, and for other aspects. Not only these effects, but also the COVID-19 also as well,
Yes.
delayed the inauguration of the Grand Egyptian Museum. So if this happened to any other place all over the world, for surely it will not only delay but may stop this such a great and huge master project or national project of Egypt, which is Grand Egyptian Museum.
Doctor, you were the former director of the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir, which has thousands of artifacts and statues and monuments from the Egyptian eras, different eras as well,
Right.
throughout history. What is the difference between the Grand Egyptian Museum and the museum in Tahrir? For anyone who's seeing us, what is the difference? Because he could be planning, or she could be planning, the entire visit around the gem.
What I would like to say is that the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir, in Cairo, was established in 1902,
Yes.
inaugurated in 1902. So in 2002, we celebrated the centenary of the museum.
Yes.
It houses 160,000 of real artifacts of the Egyptian civilization through ages, starting from Stone Ages, pre-dynastic period, and historic Egypt, archaic Egypt, Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, late period of Egypt, and Greco-Roman of Egypt.
Yes.
And the museum in Tahrir Square was the first building all over the world to be built to be as a museum.
Mm.
Any other museums or older museums in Europe and in other places, they were not museums. They were palaces, they were historic
They had other
buildings.
benefits.
Then they transferred to be
A museum,
museums.
yes.
In fact, the technology in 1902 was completely different than technology in the second millennium. So this a little bit different between the museum in Tahrir Square and the Grand Egyptian Museum in near Pyramids Plateau. I mean that the display art of objects in Tahrir Square
Yes.
is completely different than the display art in GEM, the Grand Egyptian Museum. Also, facilities for the visitors in GEM will be completely different than the facilities in Tahrir Square, Tahrir Museum.
Yes.
Also, the lighting system will be different, labeling system will be different. Also, the modern technology in GEM will be completely different than the technology in Tahrir Museum.
Speaking of the museum in Tahrir, the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir, as you mentioned, it has 160,000 artifacts, different artifacts. After the inauguration of the GEM, how do you think the display would be changing in the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir? Because a lot of artifacts will be transferred to the GEM. A lot of mummies were transferred to the NAMEC, the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, as well in Fustat. So it's like distributing artifacts all over the country, or maybe all over the capital.
Let me tell you something, that the reason of which led Egypt to start to open or to build a new museum in Giza and the Civilization Museum and the regional museums or provincial museums all over Egypt. First is to increase awareness for the Egyptian about their history, their ancient civilization and heritage. Second is to help and boost tourism and attracting visitors coming to Egypt, since tourism is performing one of the main sources of national income.
Yes.
So it was planned to build a new museum also because Tahrir Square became more crowded and the pollution of cars and buses became too much, as well as the huge number of artifacts in the museum make it very crowded and it was not able or not giving the chance to the visitor to see everything, because 3/4 or 2/3 of the number of this huge number were kept in stores.
Yes.
Only 1/3 was on display. So therefore, the policy is to take some of the stored objects to be on display in other new museums. This was the plan of the Egyptian government to build a new museum, Grand Egyptian Museum, as well as the new provincial museums, to help the tourism and also to increase the awareness of the Egyptian about their history and civilization.
Yes, Doctor, you mentioned the way things and the artifacts were displayed in the museums, like the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir for the past decades, for example, and now we have the NEMC, the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, and we are awaiting the official inauguration of the GEM. First of all, how do you see the way the display took place at the NEMC, at the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization? Because it was through different ages as well, different eras, the Islamic, the Christian, the Roman, Greek, as you mentioned, the Pharaonic, all the ancient Egyptian era as well. But
Even
it has,
pre-dynastic and prehistory and Stone Ages.
yes, but it has an explanation next to every item. It focuses on maybe 2 or 3 items from different eras, from different ages, from different dynasties, as you mentioned. How do you see the things will be developing even further for the GEM, the Grand Egyptian Museum?
Before we moving to NEMC and GEM,
Yes.
adding to your previous question, that the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir Square started to redisplay the objects after taking some objects to different museums. So we have more area, more places to display the artifacts in a better way, in a little bit modern way,
Yes.
with new lighting system and new labeling and new showcases.
Yes.
If you visited the museum like before 10 years ago, it was completely different. Nowadays, if you visit the museum, you will see that the display is different, a little bit more modern than before,
Yes.
and lighting system as well, and labeling. Not only the display art of objects and lighting and labeling, but also the building itself. We started initiative to retrieve the museum to its original state during foundation. The walls were repainted according to the original design,
Yes.
and floors as well, and ceilings, windows, and with modern treatment to help the artifacts or to save the artifacts from ultraviolets, which affects the colors of artifacts. This kind of modern the museum was started after moving some artifacts to NEMC and GEM and other provincial museums all over
Yes.
Egypt. According to the NEMC, you can see the different eras of ancient Egypt, starting from Stone Ages and pre-dynastic period and Old Kingdom and New Kingdom and late period and the Greek Roman and Islamic era.
Yes.
So the NEMC is displaying the history and civilization from early beginning to modern times. As well as royal mummies,
Yes.
which transferred from Cairo Egyptian Museum to the NEMC, to the Fustat NEMC, and the whole world show and saw the parade of transporting these royal mummies to the NEMC. It was really a wonderful celebration,
Yes.
and most of the world appreciated, and they were astonished of this parade. The same happened when also reopening the Avenue of Rams in Luxor,
Yes.
And inshallah, God's will, the inauguration of the Grand Egyptian Museum also will be a great festival, and the world will see something exactly and completely different than other festivals we celebrated in Egypt.
What is the importance of technology in terms of building new museums, a huge museum like the Grand Egyptian Museum, the GEM? What is the role of technology nowadays in this industry?
Technology is, in fact, the Grand Egyptian Museum based on modern technology. It is the most recent, newest, largest museum all over the world.
Yes.
And it will be the greatest to display as a huge number of artifacts, about 100,000 of real artifacts representing ancient Egyptian history from pre-dynastic period until Greco-Roman period.
Yes.
It will show the statues, it will show royals, it will show priests, nobles, princes, royal families, also official employees, and
Yes.
also commander officers of army, and all different figures of the society in ancient Egypt. So technology will help in display art of objects, as well as interactive display of artifacts, as well as facilities presented to the visitors. Devices will added to or delivered to the visitors to help the visitor to understand more about ancient Egyptian history and civilization, as well as the visitor can ask a question through devices, electronic devices and modern devices, and also can read about the artifacts, also can see movies about discovery of the object and places where related to the object, characters related to the objects, other objects on display, not in the museum, in other museum, whether in Egypt or outside Egypt,
Yes.
will make a combination between these stories and artifacts to give the visitor a clear idea about the stories of the objects and the history of the time of these objects.
In terms of the numbers of tourists coming into Egypt to be visiting the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir, for example, and right now we could be having the Grand Egyptian Museum overlooking the Giza or the Pyramids Plateau as well. As the former director of the museum in Tahrir, how much in a change of numbers of tourists do you think it would be happening after the inauguration of the GEM? Because of course you know the numbers of people or the tourists or the anyone who's coming from outside of Egypt to be visiting the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir. Do you think it could be increased?
Let me tell you something about numbers of visitors.
Yes.
For the GEM, its estimated number of daily visitor is 15,000, which is almost between 2 and 3 times more than the flood visitors to Tahrir Square.
Yes.
But the number of visitors daily before 2011 in Tahrir Square Museum was between 10,000 and 12,000 per day. But this number completely turned back after 2011.
Yes.
And we started a day by day to retrieve some visitors starting from end of 2011 and 2012, 13, 14, 15. For the time being is about between 6,000 and 8,000. But in the new Grand Egyptian Museum,
Yes.
estimated is 15,000 per day. And per year it will be maybe 10 million visitors for the Grand Egyptian Museum. According to your question, if the flood of the visitors to Tahrir Square will
Yes.
be affected after inauguration of Grand Egyptian Museum, I think Tahrir Museum will still have its own perfume, aroma, since it will house, instead of 160,000 objects, 2/3 of them inside storages and storerooms. I think masterpieces of the museum, it will remain in the Tahrir Museum, as well as most of the scholars will will keep visiting the museum.
Yes.
Scholars, researchers, students of history, of archaeology, of arts,
It is not
of
one
tourism.
against the other, it's one completing the whole set that we have.
Right. But the Grand Egyptian Museum will have the regular visitors. But specific visitors will be still visiting the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir. Also, many of the tourism will concentrate on the Grand Egyptian Museum, but in Tahrir Square, interested people, scholars, students, amateurs will keep visiting the Tahrir Square Museum.
How do you see the importance or the privilege of the location of the Grand Egyptian Museum overlooking the pyramids plateau, the Giza pyramids, and right now I think we have an airport as well near to the Grand Egyptian Museum, the Sphinx Airport. So how do you see the importance of developing the whole area around the museum, of having a whole idea of an experience, a full experience for the tourists to be coming from the airport to be visiting the pyramids, and then we have the touristic way to the Grand Egyptian Museum, all this at the same place quite?
Let me tell you that Egyptian Museum in Cairo
Yes.
and pyramids area were the most or top visiting sites to the visitors along the long time ago.
Yes.
But the problem, one of the problem was that the distance from Tahrir Square to pyramids and the traffic,
Congestion.
it was about between 45 and 1 hour at least.
Yes.
During rush hours. So this was one of the reasons of thinking of erecting and establishing new museum, which will facilitate to the visitors to enjoy the time instead of wasting the time such in traffic, As you mentioned, the new airport Sphinx is established to receive airplanes for visitors who are coming to visit Giza Plateau and the Grand Egyptian Museum. Also, the visitor from Grand Egyptian Museum will be able to see the Giza Plateau pyramids area.
Yes.
And also it will be a road from the museum to the pyramids area, and the visitor could use a type of wagons like Taf, electric wagons.
Yes.
It's only about 2 kilometers, so they can enjoy this road.
It will be an experience in itself.
Of course, and this road will also provide the visitor with different facilities, like shops, like restaurants, like cafeterias, and gift shop, and so on. So this will be able to facilitate the visit to the visitors, to the tourism, and not to let them suffering from traffics or something may spoil their visit. So I think this will able also besides road, I mean airport and the road from the museum to the pyramids.
Yes.
Also, the government erected new modern hotels to serve and to help tourism and attracting more number of visitors to Egypt.
On the other hand, you were the former director of the provincial museums as well of Egypt. So this means that the government is paying attention under the political leadership for the museums outside of Cairo, outside of Greater Cairo and the Giza Pyramids, Plateau and all these places. What is the importance of taking care of those museums and the number of tourists that could be potentially visiting those provincial museums?
This is a good question because Egypt, starting from 2014 till now, integrated many provincial museums like Hurghada Museum,
Yes.
Sharm el-Sheikh Museum, Kafr el-Sheikh Museum.
And in Upper Egypt.
In
Upper
Upper Egypt,
Egypt as
yes.
well.
In Malawi Museum.
Yes.
And renovated other provincial museums in Aswan. In Aswan also there is Nubia Museum, which is also considered a modern museum.
Yes.
So I think this is the idea of spreading the museums outside Cairo.
Yes.
It helps in two ways. First is to increase the awareness to the Egyptians, to the children, to the students, to the public about Egypt history, artifacts, archaeology, and this will let the students, the children, able to keep their heritage and to preserve this heritage and to deliver the message to their friends, colleagues everywhere in Egypt and outside Egypt.
Yes.
Also, it helps tourism and boosting tourism to go to already Hurghada and Sharm el-Sheikh. Already the visitors come to entertainment, but we are trying to change the attitude of the visitors to cultural.
To have both at the same time.
They can enjoy both at the same time.
Yes.
If they don't have time to come to Cairo or to Luxor or to Alexandria or to Giza, they can enjoy watching and visiting these museums outside Cairo.
Yes, and finally, you've mentioned a very important point, Doctor, is that the Egyptians themselves, they are keen on knowing their heritage and knowing their past and the ancient Egyptian times, as well as the whole dynasties that went through history. How do you see the response of the Egyptians following the inauguration of the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, dynamic, and the parade that the Egyptians themselves, they were very proud seeing the history of their grandparents?
In fact, this kind of festivals and parades and inaugurations
Yes.
affects especially the children, young generation. They will keep remind and keep remember these festivals through their lifetime, and telling these stories to their friends, to their younger generation, to their new generation. So as we celebrated the Namek and Royal Mummies
Yes.
and Luxor Festival of Ram Avenue, Sphinx Avenue, also the inauguration of the Grand Egyptian Museum, it will be marvelous. It will astonish the whole world.
Yes.
Many of the presidents and kings will be invited to the inauguration, and the festival will hold an opera show about the history of King Tutankhamun, the young king, the boy king, the golden king, and tells about his lifetime and his death and his tomb.
Yes.
And discovery of his tomb, and the collection which will of the tomb of Tutankhamun, which will be on display. About 5,000 objects from the tomb of Tutankhamun will be on display on the Grand Egyptian Museum. And the celebration and festival, I think this event will send a clear message to the whole world that Egypt is welcoming the whole world, and Egypt is preserving the history and heritage, and Egypt is the place of where humanity started and civilization started and the religion started.
Yes,
on the earth of Egypt.
Yes, preserving our own heritage and our own treasures. Dr. Mahmoud Halwagy, the archaeological expert and the former director of the Egyptian Museum and the Provincial Museums of Egypt. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on Windows.
Thank you.
Anytime. And this brings us to the end of Windows for this week. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.